That's a great question. You have all day. We can discuss that one. Going back to 2008, last time we had a huge deficit, and I'm sure you're aware it's the largest deficit in the country, relatively speaking, per capita. And so when the new governor came into office, her job was to balance the budget. And so because of my background in finance and doing bankruptcy workouts, I spent a lot of time in the governor's office as well as outside the office in meetings, going through what were the possibilities of what could be done with respect to reducing the deficit. And not everybody likes the plan that came out of that in terms of selling off some of the assets as well as a temporary sales tax increase. But when you look at what the alternatives were, there weren't a whole lot of alternatives. And so it was either do that or your $1.7 billion more cuts you have to do, and the only place really you could do any serious cuts in the budget was K through 12. And if you cut $1.7 billion out of K through 12, you would have a disaster on your hand in the school system. And so we pieced that all together. We did back off, of course, the access program to 80% of the poverty level, which we had, actually they had to go to court over that to get that approved, but I mean there just wasn't a whole lot of opportunity. So I worked through that process before, and going forward, we're not that far away from being in a deficit situation again. Because, and you would know this, I mean, our economy just has not snapped back like it typically does after a recession. It's been, what, half of what you would normally expect in growth. Well, anytime you're growing at below 2%, you're not really creating jobs, you're not really creating much wealth, which means the revenues of the state are going to be flat, relatively speaking, except for the inflation that's going on in food, which you can't really do much with taxing food. So that's your dilemma that you have. And that's where we're going to be in another 2 years. We'll be back, unless something happens to revenues, we'll be back in a deficit situation, which means we'll have to be doing more cutting. So I think that my background and experience, and I've talked to the other gubernatorial candidates about it too, I mean, it's a team sport when you're in that situation. Everybody's got to work together because that's the only way you solve it. Okay, it's a short-term fix, you realize that. You're hoping the longer-term fix is economy gets better, which delivers more revenues to the state, which means that it can take care of the normal growth that goes on, accretion which goes on within the expenditure side of the house. So I would work very closely with them. The other thing the treasurer gets, unfortunately, responsible for, but that's okay, I've done these kinds of things before, is when receipts don't equal your expenditures, then you have to start planning on which things you're going to pay today and what's going to get paid tomorrow and when is more money coming in. So then it becomes a complete effort to manage the money and pay out as you go and try to not make too many vendors unhappy with you in making the payroll. And I will tell you that there was a moment in 2008 where it looked like they weren't going to be able to make the payroll one time for the state. So those are pretty frightening things when you start thinking about where that leads to. So you have to understand that ahead of time and understand where we have to go and what we're going to have to do. And I'll tell you that the gubernatorial candidates, I've listened to them all, they get it. They understand where we're going to be in 2 years, and that this is, again, is going to be a team effort to make sure the state can pay its bills.